Level design. One of the core elements to any video game, and one of the things that Half-Life excels at. Among its story, weapons, and enemies, Half-Life is also well known for its creative and flowing levels that were totally unique compared to other FPS games that came before it, i.e. Doom, Duke Nukem, and Quake. But when you hear praise for Half-Life's level design, it's almost always followed by mention of the exception, Xen. And I find the fact that Xen is almost unanimously agreed upon as the weakest portion of the game quite fascinating, because when a game as influential and well known as Half-Life has a fairly large section that is universally panned, you can't help but ask why. And that's the question I asked myself when making this video. Why don't people like Xen? And I'm not looking for answers like it didn't live up to the hype, or it was just kind of disappointing, because those aren't helpful. I believe finding out what exactly is bad about these levels is just as useful to a game developer as what is great about the rest of the game. And with Crowbar Collective's take on Xen right around the corner in the form of Black Mesa, this question seems all the more relevant. So to start things off, what did Xen do differently from the rest of the game? And actually a lot. They altered the gravity, they gave Gordon a long jump, they had boss fights, and of course there were the Gargantuars? They added enemies and a host of other mechanics, and which ones added to the levels and which didn't is the real question here. When it comes to the gravity and long jump, I think that they're pretty good, because you could move around so quickly with the long jump, and the gravity lets you leap so far that they were able to open up the maps a lot more, and had some cool jump puzzles in there too that would have been frustrating without them. So I don't think that that's the problem. Then there are the boss fights, namely Gonark and Nihilith, and these are kind of a mixed bag for me, because occasionally glitching out, I find Gonark to be largely without issue. But the Nihilith actually has a few problems. Like when I first played, I didn't realize that the orange spikes located on the sides of the level actually give him health, so I wasted all my ammo shooting him before I had to look up a guide to find out why he wasn't dead. Now whether that was the game's fault, or me being a dumbass, is debatable, so I'm just gonna coolly move on. Now during the fight, the Nihilith will use an attack where he shoots a teleporter at you that sends you to one of a few little challenge areas to beat before you can go back to fighting the boss. And I like this idea in concept, but in practice it feels like filler. Now his other attack is basically a hailstorm of these purple orbs that home in on the player, and I don't really like this attack either, because the orbs are a little too good at homing in on you, so you end up just dipping behind a pillar instead of actually trying to dodge them, which I feel like is what they intended for you to do. Now this is especially true on hard mode, because each one of them will do 50 damage. One addition to the levels that I actually find pretty interesting is the inclusion of the grunt pods, which are basically these obstacles placed strategically throughout the levels that when blown up spawn an alien grunt, which is basically the hardest normal enemy in the game. And I understand what they were trying to do with this, an attempt to stop you from using the win button that is the grenade launcher, but in the end it just makes the player kind of walk on eggshells whenever they're near one, and if you happen to place an explosive poorly and unleash 2 to 3 of these guys, you're better off just restarting at your last save than bothering trying to fight them. One addition to the levels that I find just plain confusing are the healing pools. Throughout all other parts of the campaign, you use health stations or packs to top up on health. But in Xen, you have to sit in these pools of this blue liquid to regain lost health, and I truly have no idea why they did this. Normal health stations won't take more than a few seconds to empty, and are just kind of brief respite for the player. But the health pools require you to sit still for sometimes up to a minute to get full health, and it's not so egregious that it's deserving of a rant, but the change just doesn't make any sense and throws off the pacing of the levels. So having heard all of that, you might be asking, so what? What information can be derived from that? As far as boss fights go, you should make sure that the player's objective is obvious and they never feel like they're ineffectual against their enemy, along with keeping the boss fight flowing and not filled with starts and stops. If you're adding a mechanic that limits the player's use of a certain ability, like the grunt pods due to the grenade launcher, then just make sure that you're doing it smartly and not making the levels frustrating. And what can we learn from the healing pools? Well, don't be fucking stupid.
Oh yeah. Alright. Somebody's hurt.